Hello and welcome to the Young Film Academy podcast, the essential podcast for teenagers looking to find their way into the creative industries. And we're going to be covering all the bases of the creative industries today, aren't we, Mr. James Walker?
It's not really all of them. But I think that's a bit too broad. That's a bit too broad. We've only got whatever we got, an hour or something. We are going to be talking about theatre today, and
film.
Theatre and film and their relationship. And opera. We're going to touch a bit on opera.
That's quite a few bases.
There's quite a few. There's not all of them. And we are going to try and investigate this relationship. We're going to try and unpick a bit. Theatre and film are kind of like, are they cousins? Are they brothers and sisters? Are they distant aunts and uncles? Like, what is the relationship from a practical, we're making this stuff point of view? If you're going to make theatre, if you're going to make films, how different is that as an experience? Well, we're going to try and pull this apart. And I'm really excited because theatre is how I started. Did you start with theatre, Dan, at school?
Yes. I mean, if you're going to count the school plays in primary school, then yes.
Yep,
if not, I was okay. Well, then I was a great narrator for the nativity. Maybe I was a sheep as well before that, but when it gets to secondary school, which is when it's like a choice, right? I did all of them by choice, but I'd already started doing film stuff before secondary school. So, do you know what I mean? So I chose to do both simultaneously. Yeah.
Well, you're pretty early, which is hopefully what our listeners will be doing, is that they're sort of, because I think up till fairly recently, and Young Film Academy started 16 years ago. So before then, certainly it was almost every young person started with theatre. And that was how you kind of learnt to tell stories and how you worked with a group of people to do something, because making a short film wasn't an option, or doing a little piece of television or YouTube, whatever it was, just wasn't available. So, And I suppose the other thing I'd say is that theatre is an incredibly old art form. I mean, it goes back, obviously the ancient Greeks were doing it. So we're talking about sort of 2,500 years. We know that human beings have been telling stories to each other using theatre as the art form, whereas film has been going about 127 years or something, in terms of it's a relative baby. So it's kind of the new
and those films were rubbish. So even less time if you count the ones that made sense.
It's the new kid on the block is the point, isn't it? So, and there's a long way to go. So we are going to be trying to unpick and learn from somebody who sort of works in theatre primarily but has also worked across film. And we're really, really excited to have with us today a theatre, opera and film director, Natalie Abrahami, who has done some amazing work. She was for a while the artistic director at the Gate Theatre in Notting Hill in London. She was associate director at the Young Vic Theatre, which is an absolutely brilliant theatre with a real youth focus, very vibrant, again in London. And she's working at the moment on a big show for the Royal Opera House, and she's just done tons of stuff, including making films as well. And she works across all these media. So it's going to be great, Dan. We're going to learn a lot.
Super. Well, I'm very excited because we both obviously have this history with theatre and film, and now we're going to learn from a true master. Because my theatre world experience disappeared very quickly into a vacuum as I sort of focused on film. So it's almost like there's so much I don't know that I feel like, is going to be applicable across the mediums, but I can't wait to hear. So, yeah. So shall we hear from her?
Let's do it.
Welcome to the podcast. Natalie, how's it going?
Good. Nice to sort of be with you virtually.
Oh, it's so good to have you with us, Natalie. Thank you so much for joining us. So you've had this amazing career across theatre, opera and film. And today we're really trying to delve into the relationship between, I suppose, film and theatre, really, and sort of working out what it's like to work in those two types of formats or mediums. So maybe can you kick us off with kind of give us an idea of, because you've obviously done lots in theatre, what kind of film stuff have you done, and how did that strike you when you started working in that medium? What was surprising or different about it?
So I think what's interesting to me is that in terms of like starting out, what I really wanted to do was be a photographer. And that's kind of what I really like the idea of framing pictures. And I did some work experience when I was 16 at an advertising company. And I ended up on a film set of a commercial. And I watched the director at work in that, and I was like, this is amazing. The way they were working with a sort of with a moving image and talking, kind of like it was animated, and I was really excited by it. So it sort of shifted my sort of focus from maybe 2D to sort of 3D, although of course still kind of viewed through a 2D lens. And then I guess I thought that I needed to hone my craft working with actors, and I would try and do that in a sort of analog way, I guess, by working in the theatre. And that has seemed to be where I have mainly stayed over the last, I'm still there honing my craft. But increasingly, I have kind of started to sort of like try and move further into film, and sort of have things in development, and have had the opportunity to make some short films. And I guess for me, what I kind of really enjoy about the two media and where they meet is I love working with people. Like, collaboration is at the heart of what I do and what I love and what makes me really tick. And I think the collaborations are sort of different in film, but the skill set is the same. And that, I think, is what has drawn me to it, that you're collaborating, you're making these it takes so long to get a film off the ground, or kind of, and it takes a long time actually to get plays off the ground, but probably is a bit quicker, which is maybe why the turnaround sometimes means that I'm more in theatre. But I get a bit bored in my own brain of what my own thoughts are. And as soon as I'm with other people, I kind of find that so energizing. And I love kind of how one idea triggers another, and kind of had that cascade. That's what makes me feel really alive.
Mm. And when you directed short films to begin with, having done lots of stage stuff, what were you struck by about just the process of filmmaking, I suppose?
So I think that maybe, and you please, would love to hear your thoughts on it. But from coming at it from a theatre perspective, it feels to me that it's all the same things, but just in a slightly different order. So you kind of put them, it's sort of a bit like consequences or whatever. So what I love about the making, that sort of sculptural making process in rehearsals, where you do lots of different versions of things, and you go, let's do a sketch of this, or let's try that out, or let's kind of do a composite, or things like that. Actually, you can do lots of different takes, and you can get lots of different angles, and you can get lots of things, but it's all within a master that you have, that is your context in when you're shooting. But then when you're in the edit, that's the rehearsal process. So it's a bit sort of reversed, but actually that's kind of what I love, that you're sort of going, oh, well, what if we told the story in this context, or we kind of bookended it, or kind of we kind of did it out of sequence. So I really, the part of the theatre, I love all of the making process of theatre. It really thrills me from the first. I just got a new draft of a play that kind of pinged into my inbox just before we started speaking. That's kind of, I love it from all of the stages. But I do really like once you've got through your rehearsal process, I really like when you go into the tech and the technical schedule, the technical process, where you've been basically in your rehearsal room, which is, I've been into many theatres in schools that are way better equipped than a lot of the theatres that I have worked in. But when you're in your rehearsal room, where you're like, right, this cup of coffee represents the crown of England, and everything is kind of makeshift, going into the theatre itself for the technical rehearsals, where you're putting the real props and the real costumes under the real lights on the real set. That's where the vision comes together, and I absolutely love that. And that feels like part of the big making process to me. And then being able to watch it in front of an audience, I learn so much, because I learn when they breathe, when they laugh, when they're shocked, when they start coughing, which means they're bored. All of those things I kind of can respond to. Whereas in film, that is quite different, because you do have your rehearsals in advance, but then you walk into your technical schedule or into the set quite early, and you do the making on that. And then when you have to do you then do different cuts and get different responses from different audiences. So I think there's a lot of things that there's a lot of crossover, because they are sort of quite manual processes in that sense of kind of like making. But I think sometimes the order of things is a bit different.
Yeah, so it's so interesting. I mean, there's so much to unpick here, because I've always thought that, let's take a scene, obviously when you watch an entire play, when you are experiencing it, it's happening literally in live time, right? Whereas often with a scene in a movie, you might not shoot the entire scene all in one go. You have to break it down into bits. So it feels very kind of itty bitty in some ways. How do you as a director try to get over that? Because, that can impact stuff, right? Just the technical need to reset cameras and reset lights for different angles, and not have that lovely through line which you have in theatre, which is like, off you go, guys, just go it, run at it, and let's just see how we do.
I mean, that's where I think I have such immense admiration for actors who work across both media, because in theatre, you have to hold, as an actor, you hold your whole performance. Like, it goes ready, steady, go, and you're off the green. You've got your green from the stage managers, and you're off and you go until the end of the show. Whereas in a film, you're often doing you're following a character trajectory out of sequence, and then not only out of sequence over the whole of the shoot, which might be 3 months, but then within each day there are so many different stop starts. And so I feel there's a lot of internal work that actors do by themselves to do that, which I have such respect for, kind of like the kind of how you hold space in yourself to kind of maintain that through line. In terms of from a directorial perspective, I get really excited. I know that a lot of people don't like the technical rehearsals. Sometimes actors find technical rehearsals in theatre kind of, they don't like the shift so much because the energy goes off from them onto lots of technical processes. Like you constantly have to wait for the lights to reset or kind of reprogramming the sound. And that's often where I'm trying to sort of avoid being behind all the desks, the programming desk, and try and get close to the actors and keep the character thinking and the storytelling alive, because it is a very, as you say, itty bitty process, and film I think magnifies that. But I also get really excited by that nitty gritty, because that's where I think you do the storytelling of kind of like what makes someone have a spine tingling reaction to something. Is it the level of the lights, or is it kind of when you put that music cue in, and where does it start and how does that work? So I think because I've been sort of planning it in my head for so long, I can sort of maintain the through line because I don't mind the pauses, because I know the pauses are to get to the next stage. And I think that's what the actors are doing as well, when they're kind of in film, because they know, I always knew we were going to shoot this out of sequence, so I'm this age at this point, and I'm this far into a relationship with that at that point. But it is disruptive. But I think most people have, in the same way that when you're preparing to run a race or you're preparing for exams or whatever, you have a certain amount of energy allocated for it. And if someone said you were running a race and someone said, oh, the finish line isn't here anymore, it's now 20 meters later, you'd be like, I can't do it. I'd absolutely pace myself to the finish line. You can't. You just don't have the adrenaline. 20 meters is an exaggeration, but I think sometimes it feels like that you just have paced yourself exactly. So I think it is about there's an internal body clock, I guess, that I have about making something, and I know how to pace myself within it. And I think that as people get more experience, whether on whichever side, backstage or on stage or kind of, crew or kind of performers, you get to know how you conserve your energy so that you can hold the thing that only you are responsible for, which might be the lighting or which might be the performance.
Yeah, so interesting. I've been struck by for a lot of actors, they see, theatre is pure, I suppose, in some way. So you often get these stories, will come out in the press about sort of, X or Y actor or actress has just done movies and all they want to do is get back to the purity of theatre. They want to get on stage. They want to have 2 hours where they're just doing it in a go. And it is quite interesting that. And I was thinking, as you were talking, exactly right, that for an actor, those things of sort of, you're dying in this scene and then later you're essentially being born in the next scene, and you've got to kind of work out where you are in that journey. I mean, that is just tough. But let's just talk briefly about the logistics of that thing, because I'm struck by how theatre, because some of our listeners might be just storytellers, right? They're kind of young people. They kind of want to tell stories, and they're looking at how they can do that. Is it radio? Is it theatre? Is it film? What do you think are the kind of, I suppose, the advantages of theatre as a starting point for kind of telling those stories versus, let's say, film in your experience?
Well, it's such a good question, because I think my experience is quite outmoded in some way, because I would have said, a few years ago, before the invention of the smartphone and before the kind of the democratizing of digital media. And of course, I know it's actually incredibly complicated, because sometimes it's not possible to get hold of that technology. But I would have said that theatre, it's really possible to get theatre made. Like, it is possible, you can write your script and you can find some actors and you can sort of make it. But we've just had a pandemic, and actually it's quite complicated to sort of do things. Whereas actually, if one has access, if you've got the skill, which is you can write on paper or whatever it is, and you've got a story you want to tell, actually I think it is now possible to get it made, but with technology that people have in their own homes often, and you can upload it and you can make it seen. And I think there are lots of things that are very problematic about social media and the kind of online, the sort of I feel like we need a digital renaissance where we can sort of protect ourselves a bit better and sort of control, sort of make the world a bit better in terms of our digital presence and footprint. But actually, I think there are also lots of ways that you can communicate more easily with more people in a way that wasn't possible before. So I think my instinct is I would always say, what stories do you want to tell and how do you want to see them? And then try, if you want to see it in the flesh, you want to be in the same room with those actors, then I think I would sort of encourage you towards theatre. But I think if actually that's something that you think that you can write a script for and you can sort of also shoot it in various locations kind of in your own area or wherever it is, then I would say absolutely kind of, I think challenges are a great thing that you can set yourself, and you can make a piece, a film or a play that is closed time and closed space. So it's kind of like, right, it's going to be set in my flat and this is where it is, and it's all over the duration of one day, and you can sort of control it. But you can also be more ambitious or more stylized. But my feeling with all of these careers and choices is that they require a degree of self-starting in you, in that people very rarely, I think, knock on the door and say, hey, James, I just heard via telepathy that you've got this brilliant script that you want to do, and I'm going to now give you all of the facilities to do it. It just doesn't, and to my knowledge, it doesn't happen that way. If it's ever happened to you, then that
would be great.
It would be good, wouldn't it?
It would be amazing.
Yeah.
But so my feeling always is, as long as you are trying to make something happen, your energy makes things happen, and talking to people makes things happen. Talking to your friends, it doesn't have, in that sense, just that, but I don't yet believe that telepathy exists. So until it does, I think we just have to try and make things happen.
Well, that's because that was my way in, was theatre, right? So, because that's a lot of kids at school, because when we see this a lot at Young Film Academy, where we say, who's ever done, especially with actors, who's ever done the acting before? And actually a lot of hands in the room will go up because they've all done a school play or they've been a part of that. Very few of them have done any screen acting, and that goes through all the drama schools, we notice as well. Like, because actually even the big name drama schools really struggle with just delivering screen acting training just because the technological implications of that. So everyone starts in theatre. But I started with theatre. It was a group of kids at my school, and we just got together and we sort of did our own production, off our own back. And then we took that to the Edinburgh Fringe. And then I wrote another show when I was 19, took that to the Edinburgh Fringe. And so it was like, it was relatively accessible. Do you know what I mean? As a medium to get started in, where you could actually be telling stories without the technology. So yeah, I think it's an interesting starting point for a lot of kids.
I think the main thing that I would say is that try wherever you see an obstacle, if you feel like you can't jump over it, then find another way through, because I think there is always ways to make things get made. And maybe you thought it was a film script, but you're not finding the way to do it. Then try and make it with your friends, because at least that way you're testing it and you're hearing it, and maybe you can in your school sort of get a reading of it. Like the first play I directed in my school, so I was always kind of sort of drawn to some. I thought I was interested in theatre, but acting is my ideal nightmare. Like, the idea of going on stage is so terrifying to me. And so I kind of did makeup for some school plays, and I kind of tried to do different things and couldn't quite find where my thing was. And then I tried to apply to direct a show at my school, and I didn't get it. And then I said, but I really do want to direct this show. And so they let me direct it on the fire escape at the school. So it wasn't like it wasn't in a theatre. It was like a site-specific performance. It was like, this Oedipus Rex is set on the fire escape, and you were invited to see it. But
good production design already, though.
Yeah.
Not even needing to try.
Edgy.
It was good, and it was outdoors, and it didn't rain. So, and my main memory of that was like standing at the school gates trying to stop people going home when I wanted to be rehearsing with them. When I was like, I think we've got a rehearsal now.
get on the fire escape.
Yeah.
And was this for a young audience?
It was for anyone who was willing to come and see it, really.
Oh, yeah.
It was like it was at my school.
Okay, yeah. Because Oedipus Rex is like, it's quite savage.
Yeah, I think I just happened to be doing it in my class civ classes, and I was like, "This is a play. I should do. I want to do a play." Like, I don't. Yeah, it was quite savage.
I want to do that about incessant blindness.
We did a very stylized production. No, but I think the only reason I'm saying is that people saying no to you, that is a great red flag. People saying no and you still wanting to do it is a good thing, and you just need to go, right, I'm going to do it, and I'm going to find a way to do it. And I think taking space is a really important thing to do. Just go, actually this is something I care about and I want to do, and finding a way to do it. Because there will always be obstacles, and there'll be obstacles at a certain age, and then there will always be obstacles. So getting used to knowing how to work around them is a great life skill.
Absolutely. Just sort of talking of lifestyle, I suppose, in terms of a director's lifestyle, we try to on this pod a little bit unpick kind of like what's the reality of living, being, when this is your job. And a lot of that is about traveling, times of things, how long they take, all of that stuff. So, I mean, we've talked quite a lot on this pod about different films and that lifestyle, and especially of a film where, you relatively small amounts of rehearsal time, right, on films. I mean, typically almost none sometimes. And as you say, you arrive on set and you kind of almost find it straight away. And then, so a film, depending on the length of it, if it's a feature film, can be a very intense 3 months of your life where you're just hardly living, you're sleeping and you're living on breathing this thing. And then kind of when it's done from a director's point of view, to some extent it's done. I mean, you're included in post maybe to a greater or lesser extent. And then it exists. So it doesn't have to be the equivalent of done every night. I mean, it exists in a digital format. You just press play on it from now to the end of time. So it's like there's this potentially long development time, which could be years of trying to get that film actually made, then this incredibly intense period of actual making of, let's say, 3 months, and then sort of it can live in its perfect format for as long as it exists afterwards. So if that's the sort of very rough breakdown of the film version, can you give us the sort of the theatre show equivalent of that from your point of view as a director?
Yes. So one of the things that I love about theatre is that it is ephemeral, that it's there, and whatever you see one night is different because of the makeup of the audience and how the actors were feeling that night. But I guess the time frame of it is different in that probably, so some projects, if I'm working on a play from scratch, that I'm working with a writer from the very first sort of idea, that can sort of take up to 5 years or so to kind of develop it to a point where it can then go into production. But sometimes you get sent a play and the theatre has already programmed it, and then your timeline is much more sort of 6 to 12 months of preparation, where you are thinking about the design, you're developing the script, you're sorting the casting, you're putting together your creatives for lighting and sound and movement, and that is a kind of, and you can juggle a few projects at the same time as you do that, because it's not a full-time commitment. And where it becomes incredibly intense, like the film shoot sort of version, is probably the 6 weeks of production, but it's half the length of what you're describing. So it's usually a 4 to 5 week rehearsal process, which is 10 till 6, Monday to Saturday. And then the technical week that we were talking about at the beginning, which is where you get onto the set, which is sort of 10 till 10 every day. So the longer shoot days, so to speak, the continuous days, where you're sort of working into the nighttime and putting all of the lighting cues and the sound cues and the music and everything together with the costumes. And then you get into previews, which is, I guess, the different version of the cuts that you might go show to your different audiences, or like the different focus group audiences you might have in a film. So you kind of might have 4 to 5 previews for a play, which is public performances, where you're still changing the play in the daytime. So you're making changes with the actors and in terms of the text and stuff. And then you will have a sort of opening night. And the opening night is, I always like to think about it, is when basically we as a creative team stop tinkering and hand it over to the actors, and the actors can invite all of their friends and family, and it's like theirs, and they will then run it for the rest of the run. And so after that, you're on what's called show call, which is probably that your performance is generally 7:30, 7:45 or 8 p.m. And you will come into the theatre probably 5 or 6. You'll kind of do a warm up with your company. You'll get into costume. You'll sort of get ready for this show. You'll sort of start to focus, but you're on show call. Your days are free. And then from a director's perspective, I probably only go in once a week, and my assistant might go in once a week. So kind of checking on the show and noting it and sort of being in touch with the actors and seeing how they are. And that run might be 6 weeks, it might be 3 weeks, it might be a year, and then you sort of have change of cast and things like that. But it's
can I ask, can they pull you in at any? So let's say the show is running for 4 months or something. Are you contracted? So 2 months in, can they just any night sort of say, Natalie, we need you to come in? But you might say, well, I'm working on another job or directing another film. Or
yes. So the way the contracts work is there's so that, for instance, that earlier bit, like when you say, oh, James, we'd love you to direct this play. We assume that when we offer you that play to direct, that you will carve out enough time in your schedule to do all the design meetings and do the things that you need. And then there'll be a sort of point in the contract which says we need you on first call to us, which means that we require you to be around more. And that might be sort of in And then there's something called exclusivity. So for instance, I am required exclusively for rehearsals. I can't be doing anything else in rehearsals. But up until rehearsals, as long as I manage to fit everything in collaboration, collegiate collaboration with everyone else, I can be working on other things. And then first call is, for instance, if there's some pre-production or things that ideally I would be at, but if I can't be at, it's okay. And you sort of need to make sure that you're sort of in the country or kind of around. And so once the show is on, it really depends. If a show has got a 4-month run, you will have something called a staff director on board, and they will be the line producer, like the person on call to do that. So if an actor gets ill or something kind of comes up, they will be the person that is called and has to drop everything in order to go and change that. And they are paid a retainer to do that, a sort of weekly fee to do that. And if something major happened, I would probably be called, but no one would like to ask my thoughts on what to do and how to approach it if it was a kind of a sort of particular force majeure thing, but I wouldn't be expected to come in. I might come in if I was around and able to, but I'm not. Yeah. Your contract as a director, you sort of have increasingly it's sort of about 4 moments, which is one which is called a signature payment, which is when you've like agreed to the job. Another one which is kind of comes usually after you've presented your model box, the idea for the design, and it's been costed, and another one on the first day of rehearsals, and another one on the opening night, which is when your sort of exclusivity period finishes.
And it's quite scary on your opening night, because in film, at least when you've edited it, you know that it's always going to be the same. Whereas in theatre, from a director's point of view, you just walk in and sort of go, what are they doing? It's totally different. Well, it was great last night. What's going on?
I mean, yeah, and that is the thing that you have to. I kind of love that. I love seeing what the actors discover, and hopefully you sort of like you're still searching and mining the roles until the end of the run. But I think it is also important to sort of keep checking in and sort of making sure that the kind of, because you can, if you change one thing and not another in response, it's kind of about everyone. I think active listening to me is really important. So in the audition process, I always think that the etymology of that word, what it comes from is to listen. And what I'm sort of trying to do in that audition process is see whether the actor I'm meeting can listen to me and I can listen to them, and we can sort of tune into each other. And that when I give them a note or a suggestion, can they take that on board and embed it? And so in that spirit of kind of, if we have a good collaboration or connection in that sense of the listening, hopefully that continues, and they are then listening to their fellow performers and to the audience and learning how to respond to it. So on the whole, I think that is one of the joys of it, that it is constantly evolving. And I will come in after a week and be like, you just found out that thing, I'd never seen you do that before, that's so exciting, why didn't we come up with it earlier? You know, that's what I love.
Do you feel like a almost what's the phrase, FOMO, fear of missing out? Do you ever get that if you don't attend one of these showings? Like, do you feel like you need to be there every time, or are you okay sort of dropping in? Because you can't be there every night, right? No, especially if it's a long run.
I don't have FOMO, but you have this thing that arrives in your inbox every night after the performance called the Stage Manager's Report. And I am always quite adrenalized from about 5 p.m., which is show call, until that has come in, because like, has everyone turned up? Is everyone well? Is everyone okay? What has happened? And then you sometimes like get these terrifying, it's lovely when it goes, what I live for is clean show, which means nothing went wrong. It was all fine. And then it might say 3 calls, which means that they went back for extra bows than what you'd planned. So that's like,
fantastic.
That's what you live for. But sometimes you find, 17 mobile phones went off, so-and-so had a nosebleed and we couldn't come back on for so you get these sort of, kind of, it's kind of interesting. And what you really dread is your phone going off during the show. And then that if you're being called by the stage manager or something, something is really problematic. So I'm always quite adrenalized during that period. Yeah. It doesn't mean I want to be there. I'm just a bit like, is it all okay? But the show reports are brilliant. I really like reading them because they are sort of lovely insight to what's going on.
That's so easy. And because I know that you've also directed opera, which is kind of its own thing. And I think you're working on a show now, aren't you? A big opera show at the Royal Opera, which is going to come out in years to come. So it's a very, very long development process. Hopefully it'll come out. Talk to us a little bit about that. I mean, for a lot of our listeners, I think opera is pretty arcane. I mean, many of our young listeners just won't have gone to see an opera. So maybe give us a little window into that world, because that's this fusion, isn't it, for music, where music's actually really important. And so to some extent, the staging is, I don't know, is it as important, or how does that work?
What I think is really interesting about opera is that it was the most popular media of its day. When it was invented, it was the most accessible thing of being able to hear live music and storytelling at the same time. And actually, I think there is a fear.
It was quite common, wasn't it, as well? It was full of filth, is my understanding. And it was like for the common folk with jokes, dirty jokes and all sorts of things like that. And it sort of moved into being this perceived high class thing.
But yeah, exactly. It was of the people. And so what I think is interesting is that it probably in lots of films that you will have seen, you will have heard opera arias. You will know a lot of things about opera without even realizing it. And what I enjoy about making it is that in theatre and in film, I really enjoy being master of time. I can decide how long this sequence takes and how we cut to it and how we do it, or kind of what. And I love that. And what's interesting in opera is that the music is really clear. There are 4 bars of this, and there, and actually that's a really interesting thing, to be in dialogue when someone has organized time for you, when a composer and a librettist have thought really carefully about the structure of the music and how the themes return. It's quite an interesting thing to be in dialogue with in terms of the staging of it. So I just really enjoy that. That there is a sort of map, a different sort of map, because I guess in theatre or in film, I feel like you do have a map, you've got your script, and then every rehearsal or every edit or everything that you do, you sort of add those little orientation lines, those orienteering lines, the kind of the contour lines of the map, and you get more detail and depth to it. And it's just quite interesting if someone has already given you the most extraordinary map, because they have sort of put so many musical motifs into it. And then I really like getting to know that and seeing how I can bring those out to an audience. So it is. I guess I just sort of feel like the world is as you know it. We all absorb stories in different ways, and actually it is just a different sort of storytelling. And if you think about how scored films are, that in a way is no different. When you start to go, oh, this is the theme that always comes on when this character is on, that is opera. And so I think it can feel
it's just in reverse.
Yeah,
you're like putting the action to the score in a way.
Yeah,
because by the sounds of it, the scores, like it's already written. The music is done completely first, or is it? It's not simultaneous or anything.
If you're doing something that's from the repertoire, so it's sort of like a pre-existing opera, it will already have been done. If you're working on a new opera, then there will be a score that you arrive with, but of course it will evolve in the same way that a new script or a film. But yeah, no, absolutely. And I think that is I think that's quite interesting. I really love live screenings of theatre and opera. I think that is a really brilliant way, because you go to the cinema, you see it on the big screen, and you get to sit in every seat in the house. I would never be able to afford to sit in the stalls. I watch from the gods, but I love being able to watch via 10 cameras to all these different shows. And I've seen a lot of operas that are on at the Met that I would never be able to go and see. And I feel like that is a really good way into it, because it's accessible. We know cinemas, we feel confident going there, and it's accessible kind of financially. You get really good seats paying, a cinema ticket. But also what I love about it is because often there is not only one interval, but maybe 2. You get these amazing short films in between, or interviews with the performers. So you actually
understand about the piece, don't you?
And you learn a lot about it. And so for me, because it's new to me as well, I'm learning about it and trying to understand. I love kind of hearing these different singers talk about how many times they've sung it, or kind of hearing the stage manager talk about how complicated the set is to kind of move around between the scenes. And I love learning about, sometimes you hear interviews with the conductor as well. And so it's I'm a huge fan of the live screenings. I just think they're brilliant.
I agree, and I think that's such a good thing to bring up, because for a lot of young listeners, they might be saying, I haven't been to a theatre in a few years. Obviously, the pandemic's been a problem, but it's not maybe part of their cultural makeup. They might never have seen an opera, and they might not even know. So you can go to, in the UK, there are cinemas that show, it's called there's live from the NT, the National Theatre, there's live from the Met Opera House, and there's various others where you can go to essentially your local cinema and see kind of a live screening of that piece that's happening in the theatre in London or New York or wherever, but it's being beamed by clever technology live to your cinema. And I think what's really interesting about this is filming theatre. So let's talk about that for a minute, because so let's go back to when I was at school, right? School play. We're filming the school play. And it's great, we're filming the school play. And what did that mean? Well, it meant you put a camera at the back of the auditorium on a tripod, which had a microphone attached to the camera, and you press record for 2 hours. And at the end of that, we all remember these, and you'd say, oh, let's watch back the school play. And you'd watch that. So what are you watching when you watch that video back? Or think you're watching essentially a wide shot, enormous wide shot, where everyone's tiny in the frame. You can see the backs of everyone's heads in front of you, and you can't hear a damn thing that anyone says until the actor shouts, because you can get it at the back, and it sounds tinny and distant anyway. But you go to the live from the NT or whatever, and it's really immersive and fantastic. But technically, that's a real feat of filmmaking, because you've got all these different angles, and you have to mic up the actors, and you have to do it all in a way that doesn't interfere with the live nature of the performance. Have you kind of had an interaction with that side of the fusing of these two things?
Yeah, I think it's so interesting. And as much as I was saying that I love the ephemeral nature of theatre, the thing that I really don't love about it is that quite often someone will say, oh, I missed your show. Can I watch it? There must be a recording of it somewhere. And there is always that recording that you've described, but that recording is not for public consumption. That recording is usually for the stage manager, in case the show is going to come back again and there's a different stage manager, or you want to look at it to kind of go, oh, did we come on at that point, or should we be extending music? It's a technical document. It's not for public consumption at all. So that's why I think the live screenings are so amazing, because what you do is you have a camera rehearsal for it. There is a director for that. And so the director of that live screening will come and watch the show. They'll talk to the director of the play about what the storytelling intentions is. They will absolutely storyboard how they want to shoot it, and then they will rehearse it with their camera team. So there'll be an extra performance of it, which might have a small audience in it, just so that it doesn't feel completely dead. But they will do a camera rehearsal where they will then be able to make an edit of the live screen to see, is this way of telling the story going to work? And so they will, and then we'll note that, and then they will do it for real live on the night that they.
So they're editing multi-camera. So it's like, at this particular moment when this character cries, we cut to camera 3, which is in a close-up because we've zoomed in for that particular moment, and then we go immediately to camera 4 because we want to track that, etc. Yeah, it's amazing, and to do that so it feels, so you're hiding the technology.
Yes, and what's interesting, I saw it. One of my favourite live streams that I saw was for a show when I was at the Young Vic, which was A Streetcar Named Desire, and it was the setup of the show was in the round, and then the actual set was revolving very, very, very slowly. And watching the camera rehearsal of that was extraordinary, because you saw all the camera people with their long cables kind of lying down on the floor to be out of shot so that they could catch it, and it would only sort of cut at exactly the point that you wanted, like the edge of the frame of the sort of set to cut. And then in the odd moment you saw the camera person, but that was so thrilling because you knew it was a feat, and you kind of want to see how it's done. You want to applaud those people. So I think it's really, I think each one is different in that sense, but is kind of absolutely the translation of how you would tell that story best on film. Because what I love about theatre is the sort of democracy of it, that you go in and you've got the wide shot, but it's essentially the master, and then you can choose. And if your best friend is playing, second soldier, or is playing the maid, and that's the only person you're going to watch, and you can absolutely, you're doing your own private close-up on it. And what is interesting in the live camera versions is that you can absolutely guide the audience and think, oh, this was a really important moment to me as a director. I'm going to try and really bring that to an audience.
It becomes significantly more subjective, right? Is that you are, as you're saying, you're directing the audience to a specific moment, and like with film, it's not always what someone's saying that's important. It's the reaction. What is the effect that's having on that person, and that's how you start to identify with certain characters within scenes. So suddenly that's being applied to theatre. So, but I wonder, you having worked in film. And being used to that subjective mode of storytelling, do you feel similar in theatre as well? Do you feel like a subjective storyteller within scenes, or do you try to create something that is a little bit more objective and the audience can sort of find their own way through?
That is such an amazing question, Dan. I think I don't know if I can answer it in the sense that I think it's inherently subjective because of it's always my lens on it or my take on how to tell the story. So even if I think it's being objective, it probably isn't. But something that is quite maybe sort of sort of an analogy or something is I did a show pre-pandemic called Anna that was set in communist East Berlin, and you were sort of given a lens. The audience was given you listened to it on headphones, so it was a binaural sound piece. So you had this very intimate experience of being inside the flat, really following a particular character's journey, the journey of the main character, the protagonist called Anna. And so what we did actually from a making perspective as a team is we just had this wide shot the whole time. You just saw the flat, the living room. And then if Anna went into the bedroom, you couldn't see her, but you could still hear her. And so for me, that felt like an audio close-up. So you got the close-up. It was like rather than point of view, like rather than POV, it was sort of point of hearing. So you were always with the protagonist, but then you were often watching something different. I quite liked the juxtaposition. I really enjoyed that. And I guess the way we created focus in certain ways was that we very, very subtly moved the lights up or down. So you wouldn't notice. It looked like the same lighting state of the flat, but we were always guiding people a little. And we learned sort of interesting things about misdirection, which was really interesting, that usually if you kind of like, this is a really important scene, let's have the character center stage. Because we were trying to really prioritize people listening. And actually that's not the sense we use most. The sense we use most is our eyes in this particularly cine literate sort of social media multi-screening world. We use our eyes a lot more than our ears. And we did certain things to force people to listen more. So we sometimes were quite sort of perverse in our staging, where we'd be like, could you stage that really important scene up in that corridor where we can't see you as well, so that we're really, really listening to what's happening.
So
or we started the show in the dark, like we took out the exit lights so that you were really forced to listen to someone opening their front door, and sort of then only gradually put on the lights. So it's kind of interesting. Everyone was sort of working outside of their skill set. Like if I've been trying to craft sort of how to stage things well, so I was like trying to learn how to stage things badly. Lighting designer being asked to light things properly, I was like, can we just keep it all really dim so we're using our ears more than our eyes? And it was just sort of an interesting.
So Woody Allen does that quite a lot in one of his tropes in his movies. Is you'll often have, and you've seen that sort of static camera wide of a street with nobody on it, and you hear the characters walking, and you hear them having conversation, and you stay there forever. It feels like it's probably 30 seconds, and then they come around the corner and they start walking towards you, and it's just like it feels kind of fresh and different because we just don't really do that in cinema so much.
I think what's interesting about that sort of idea, that's a brilliant example of it, is that you can create an intimacy with a character, because I often find, like when I meet somebody, at the point that I'm trying to shake their hand and sort of take in the feel of that, the way they are, I see them mouth their name and I don't hear it. Like it's always too much information. I was like, oh, what's your name? I kind of can't quite remember. Whereas I think if you hear people before you then see them, you sort of build up a picture in a really good way. And people used to say to hear a play, like it was a much more
that's right.
Sort of we kind of like our eyes are now prioritized, but I think it's quite interesting to think about listening and all those senses.
I think it's good. I could honestly feel like talk about this for hours. And I don't know, have you seen Dogville? Did you see the Lars von Trier film Dogville? So I think, and many of our listeners won't, but do guys look this film up, because if you're going to talk about the relationship between theatre and film, that was just such an amazing experimental fusion. Can you just talk us through it, Natalie? From your perspective, what did you make of that?
Well, I think,
and give us a sense of what he was trying to do for those who haven't seen it.
So what is really interesting about that is Dogville is interesting, and then if you're interested in that, there's a whole sort of genre films like Dogma 95 of these kind of trying to sort of look at filmmaking in a very different way, in a way of sort of like I think it was called The Vow of Chastity. I can't quite remember, but it was sort of it was really sort of trying to think about things, thinking about bringing things back to basics, and actually very, very theatrical, very, very Greek, very Aristotelian. Sort of Aristotle wrote this thing in 2,500 years ago called the Poetics, about how we make theatre and art. And in it, he talked about the unity of time, action and space. And in that sense, and so Oedipus Rex, which we talked about at the beginning, is a really good example of that. It all takes place within one one day in one place on a fire escape in my seminal production. But I guess what is interesting about the Dogma 95 is that there's no special effects, that it's all natural lighting, it's handheld cameras. And I think what is amazing about Dogville is that it really, what I love about theatre is there's a sort of contract with the audience, which is, we need you. Without you here, we can't do this, because we're asking you to suspend your disbelief. We're asking you to take imaginative leaps. We can't be hyper realistic in the way that you can be in cinema or television. So we're asking you to be part of the making process. And actually, I think what the Dogma 95 and the Dogville is really interesting about, because it's all sort of in a film set, and it's kind of, there's theatre markups on the floor, which are very like the theatre rehearsal rooms that
that's right. You haven't seen it. So it's like a soundstage in a studio where you can quite see it's just a bare floor, and someone's just taped, and they've written sort of kitchen, barn, chapel, and the actors mime sort of opening a door, but they're completely miming it. But they add the film sound effects of as if it was real, and the footsteps, the Foley stuff as well after the event. So the whole thing feels like it's partly like you are watching a film. But you can, for instance, if someone's in the barn, you can actually see, because there's no walls, you can see what's going on in the rest of the town, in inverted commas, because everyone else is in their little marked up spaces. And it's amazing. I just thought it was so cool, because you get involved, don't you, in a sort of Brechtian way of the fact that it is kind of faked is right in your face. And so once you get past that and you actually start really emotionally engaging with the characters, which you do, and it gets really dark, and you're like, oh my God, you're suddenly like, how have they done this emotional trick on me when I can see that the whole thing is a fabrication, because it's wearing that on its sleeve. Yeah,
no, I think it's brilliant. I'm sort of envious of people who haven't yet seen Feston or haven't seen Dogville, because it's so worth, all of those films are so worth watching. And I think it is interesting, in the pandemic, I made a piece called Good Grief, which we rehearsed on Zoom, and then we shot over 2 days in a film studio during one of the many lockdowns that we experienced. But what was interesting about it was we really tried to sort of tap into that kind of the absence of an audience, and knowing that we left gaps in it for the audience who we were so missing to fill in. So it was kind of very much made out of cardboard, and very much asking people to take the imaginative leap. And I think we are all, we're weaned on storytelling, from the very first stories that you ever kind of read with your, kind of as you're learning to read all those fairy tales. That's kind of like what is exciting and igniting our imagination. And so I think, actually, when you're required as an audience to do a bit more work, I think you really enjoy being there, in the sense that that you're required to figure out how the Foley of that door fits with what kind of door is it trying to represent, that creak, in terms of going into that space. I think those are really lovely imaginative games that we, as children play all the time, and it kind of keeps that sort of spirit alive.
So talking about weaning, let's talk about we Natalie. So how's that for a segue?
That was great.
Seamless.
Crunchy.
That was really good.
Crunchy. Yeah. We crunched across the threshold there, didn't we? We got that. So teenage Natalie Abrahami, give us a sense. What were you like in your teenage years? What were you interested in? What were you up to? And looking back on it, did any of it inform in any way kind of what you do now?
I think that I was a real bookworm. I was really introverted and a real bookworm, and I then ended up at university reading a lot of stories, and I really had this sense that I was only going to live one life and only have one set of experiences, and how was that ever going to be enough? How could I have as many experiences as is humanly possible? And I really felt that I sort of could vicariously kind of inhabit other characters and other people's lives by reading novels, actually more than anything. But then I did get more into kind of reading plays and understanding how kind of I loved. I kind of remember sort of having this vivid experience when we were doing we had to stage some of Wuthering Heights in an English class, and I had this really strong sense that I could hear it in my head. Like I knew how it should be. I couldn't see it yet. I couldn't see how we should stage, but I knew what it needed to sound like. And I think it took me a long time to realize that was a sort of directorial instinct. Probably it would come across as sort of something different, but in some respects, I think that was kind of maybe a kernel of something. But I guess if I don't know, I wasn't very confident. I'm not very confident now, and I think that what I do to bolster that is be really prepared. So my diligence, my research is what I use in my projects to kind of give me confidence to then break rules and then to kind of to deviate from a plan because there was something in the first place. So I kind of know, I guess the things that I found difficult maybe as a teenager, I've sort of gone, okay, I can't change those things. That's who I am, but how can I work with them to sort of make me able to do things in the medium that I want to?
So interesting. And what would be we always ask our guests at the end, what piece of advice, if you could time travel back in your time traveling machine,
or would you go for like the DeLorean from what's your sort of time traveling?
I don't know. I think I'd like to take a train. I don't know if such a thing exists.
Give you a train.
Yeah, I just like something quite analog.
We should do you know, that's a question. We should offer our guests a mode of transport back to the future.
Yeah, like the Trans-Siberian Express, but like back in time, where you can watch it sort of speed up as you go through.
Like the sort of Hogwarts of back in time.
Yeah.
I love that.
Hogwarts Express. So what would be the piece of advice you would whisper in Natalie's ear if you could?
Oh my gosh, that's such a good question. I wish I knew. I think something along the lines of life is an adventure. Embrace it. Telepathy does not exist, so make things happen for yourself. Something like that.
Amazing.
Brilliant. Well, that is the Young Film Academy spirit, because we always say, like, get out there and do it. You know, there's no better way. You've got to self-start. And I think we see that a lot in the film world, where there's that sense that because it feels like you need a lot to get a film off the ground, all that stuff. Whereas if you start small, you don't. And we always say to the young people, you know, no one's going to come to you and exactly as you're saying, say, oh, it's time for you to make a film now. You know, you've just got to get out there and make it happen somehow. And I actually always say I bore our students to death with it, and especially some camp, but find a way. There's a million obstacles and there's no one way. You just got to find a way. And
also find, like, I really like that sort of Samuel Beckett sort of principle of, you know, fail again, fail better. Sort of like that idea that it's I think this world, what I love about it is it is quite manual. It is quite dexterous. Even if you're sort of editing on a laptop, it's iterative. You only learn by trial and error. You only learn by trying something and go, did that move you? Did that make any sense? What was the story? And you go, okay, I'll do it differently. I'll repackage it. I'll kind of remake it. And I think that just do the Malcolm Gladwell 10,000 hours. Just like try and try and try, and you'll learn stuff from it. Even if you learn that you don't want to do it and you want to do something else, you will have learned from it. Everything is a valid experience, I think, would be what I would tell my younger self. Because otherwise I think I felt like always like, oh, I'm an aspiring theatre director. I think I want to do this, rather than I think I wasted a long time sort of thinking like I'm aspiring or I want to do this, and I should have just gone for it.
Well, there it is. Just go for it. Thank you so much, Natalie. Thank you for joining us. It's been absolutely wonderful to talk to you.
Thanks, Dan.
Thanks.
I haven't seen the opera, personally, James, and I really want to.
We've seen Star Wars, and Star Wars is supposedly a space opera.
It's a space opera.
It is.
You're right.
We've talked about that. It's not
you're
really
right, James. I've seen many operas, at least 9, by the sounds of it.
Well, wasn't Natalie amazing? I mean, she's the way she talks about stuff. I love the way she talks, and you can really see what an interesting mind, and how she approaches not just the sort of whatever media she's working in, but how she works with the actors to approach that, and her sensitivities. And she's so smart in the way she looks at stuff. And I love what she said about, and I'd never thought about it this way, that kind of working in film is almost like the opposite order to theatre, where theatre you're kind of rehearsing, you're trying multiple ways of doing things, and then you fix on sort of that one, and then you go into production, if you like, and you do the thing. Whereas on a movie, you more or less just arrive on set, you try it 5-6 different ways, you shoot them all, and then slightly you find that in the edit. So it's almost like you're doing the rehearsal in the edit. It's such an interesting way of thinking.
I thought that was fascinating, the way she perceived that as, like, you know, the edit being the rehearsal in a way. You know, I think because you can shoot things one way, but you know, sometimes you want to give yourself options. Sometimes you want to be able to sort of experiment in post as well. And yeah, just to have someone who has worked in both worlds give you that sense of how they see the different processes lining up, or almost like the timelines of the productions, you know. And I think a lot as well about like what she was talking about towards the end with suspension of disbelief. You know, that is a big part of theatre, right? Isn't it? Is that you're asking the audience to essentially give you half of the half of the design of the thing because they're having to imagine it in their own head.
Well, yeah, and my producer's brain loves theatre in some ways because that classic sort of that classic
you
moment
have to hire a spaceship.
Well, that is honestly it, because the you can get away with metaphor in theatre in a way that film asks something often very literal of you, which is why Dogville is such an interesting example, because it's not literal. It's everyone miming stuff just like they would in theatre. But the classic sort of what's that? We've talked about it there. The most expensive thing you can write in a script is the fleets met. Which from a producer's point of view is like, oh my goodness. I mean, you're just talking about so much money. The fleets met. I mean, where do you even begin making that happen? Whereas in a theatre, you can say, the armies clash. And to some extent, you can approach that in a very metaphorical way. You can kind of, naffly, you could have a bit of sort of flashing lights and people sort of, 5 people raising swords at each other. And you kind of go, okay, what I'm watching is the Macbeth armies fight.
I was going to say there was a Macbeth film a few years ago. I can't remember who made it, but that actually started with a bit of a smoky fight where they didn't quite have a full army. I think 2015. That sounds about right.
Smoke's great like that, isn't it? You just basically people come out of the smoke, makes you feel there's loads of others, but in fact there's only those 3 people.
Yeah, it was the one with the Michael Fassbender Macbeth.
Yes,
that is a smoky battle, if ever I've seen one. So there were some theatre principles in there. I wonder if he'd worked in theatre first. I don't know. I should know before I start.
We didn't really get a chance to talk, but that's interesting because there are so many you get. I suppose it's more theatre plays now coming and translating to film, right? So The Father, if anyone's seen that, which was it's an amazing piece about sort of dementia and Alzheimer's, with which Anthony Hopkins won an Oscar for. That was originally a stage play. And there's many examples of that, actually, of sort of things that were originally a stage play actually being filmed and translating really well in film. And obviously then there's all those Shakespeares, and that's often, I think, a young person's first touch of the difference between film and theatre is almost, at school you've got to study a Shakespeare play, and often your teacher wants to show you a Shakespeare play.
Shows you the Baz Luhrmann adaptation of Romeo and Juliet,
right? Because it's all sexy and sexed up and colourful and cool, whereas
full
often
of guns and stuff and
exactly
Leonardo DiCaprio looking cool.
Exactly. So you often see, and then you sort of go and see your school production of Romeo and Juliet,
and you're like, who are these people? They're rubbish.
But it's just a different thing, right? So I think that's the first time a young person goes, oh, I see. Okay, hold on, you can do the same thing in these completely different ways. And I thought there was so much that Natalie was talking about, and I was particularly at the end when she was talking about how she as a teenager sort of wasn't very confident. And we see this a lot at summer camp in particular, those sort of where it's residential and, students come for 2 weeks, and often we get that parents will say to us, oh, my son or my daughter isn't very confident. And actually,
is it okay they leave halfway through? Sometimes.
Yeah, and they never do, and they never want to, and they always sort of want to stay. And actually, you see these young people coming out of themselves because you don't need to be an alpha personality type. And in fact, that's often really not the best way to work in a team. And what Natalie, who's obviously gone on to have such a fantastic career, as a director, and she's not going in there to sort of tell everyone what to do. She's, as she said, that interesting thing about the audition process. So the audition, the root of the word is to listen. And so it's basically, do I have the ability to listen to this person? Do they have the ability to listen to me? That's key. It's not a one-way street. And that she kind of Natalie overcame her sort of lack of confidence as a teenager, which I think so many teens feel. I mean, I think that would be really common, but with preparation. And I think that's the key, is that she, and I think we all learn this, that you do need to do the prep and put the work in. You can't expect to just turn up and without it. So, that was Natalie's strategy. And that I think is so interesting.
100%. And that confidence comes from, as she was saying, from failure. I don't know what Natalie's failed at, but by the sounds of it, she's worked on some amazing stuff, and by the sounds of it, she's worked across so many different fields and has so much knowledge. But you don't see the failures, and I think that's a nice reminder as well for our listeners, isn't it? It's like,
completely.
We're constantly surrounded by narratives of debut films of they're breathtaking. They've never done it before. They are just unbelievable. And the reality is, it's like hard work is the and failure is the
put the 10,000 hours
stuff.
in before you get to the good stuff. Yeah,
Exactly.
You've just got to get out there, and that message of just being dynamic. So yeah, just absolutely brilliant. And we didn't get a chance to discuss that she will be working at the Young Vic Theatre. Actually, we were talking off air. The Young Vic Theatre, which is a fantastic theatre in London, which has a real kind of focus on youth and really trying to engage young people in theatre, because there is this real perception, isn't there, that theatre's a bit fusty, it's a bit, it's a bit. I was going to say dirty, not really dirty, I don't think, but dusty, and that
Definitely
for young people,
mice.
it's not necessarily how they engage, which is why things like the NT Live and various things where you can actually go and see these filmed theatre shows is a brilliant way in. But she's working on a project which is all involving a teen cast and is all sort of set in a sci-fi future where teenagers put their parents on trial for crimes against humanity. Apparently,
That sounds very cool.
Yeah.
Like that's such a 2022 sort of filmy concept. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, well, it'll shortly be a film, no doubt. Dan.
Apathy with the leaders of today, and the
No doubt.
and the absolute care and protests of the youth. It's incredible.
So we've got a question, Dan. That's
very exciting.
Give us a questiony sound effect. Here it comes.
Question for the king.
Oh, it's changed this week. It's a theatre. That's what's doing it to you. You thought theatre and you've gone all big. Okay.
100%.
This is from Freya, who's age 17, and says,
Hello, Freya.
I've put on a play at my school with some friends, and we're really proud of how it's turned out. We'd like to film it to be able to show it to people after the run is finished. What tips do you guys have on filming plays? Because we actually touched on this with Natalie.
We did. I think it's going to come down to resources, right? It's like, how many cameras can you get together? I think your bog standard is you have a camera right at the back. Bear in mind, is there a sound system? Like, are your characters mic'd up? Because if they're mic'd up and they go through a sound system, then you can speak to the tech guy or girl who's running the sound, and they will be able to give you like a sound output, and you can record that into like a external sound recorder, like a Zoom. If you've got two cameras, then you have one at the back static, and then one of them is going to be your sort of roaming camera, which basically means that you're zoomed in on that camera and you're going to be following the action, maybe whoever's talking, and that way you can cut between the two. And then if you have more, then you want two closer to the stage and sort of shooting across, because normally one character's looking left to right and one character's looking right to left, generally speaking, and you can cover it like that. In fact, if you have three, I'd say go for those two cameras and the one at the back.
Yes, I think let's be clear. I think three would be the ideal, wouldn't it? Because you have sort of one master shot at the back, which is cutting the entire stage in a wide shot, essentially. And then you've got one placed to the sort of front corner and the front corner, which you can't see the camera person in the wide, but they have zoomed in from their respective positions. That gives you, in the edit, three angles to cut between. Is probably your best bet. And then those two roving on tripods are sort of capturing whatever it is that's relevant.
Yeah. And if one of them or two of them mess up at the same time, you've got that nice static shot at the back that you always just cut to that, so that the overall recording is going to be really cool, and isn't full of the camera person falling over.
Yeah. And then like sound, sound is always the really tricky one here. So look, option one is you're going to find what we call radio mics, which are like little clip mics that go on to people that's kind of hidden that you can't really see, but then you need a little box on their belt at the back, and then it has a transmitter in it. It can get quite complicated, and you need that for every single actor. So possibly a better way is to find a way of even hanging, even if you hang like two microphones just down above the stage that you're working on, and they can sort of pick up sound and use a microphone that's not too directional. So it's a bit more sort of wide in its field. And then you should be able to pick up fairly decent sound almost wherever the characters are on your stage. But sound is the trickier one for sure.
100%. Yeah. It's the sound's never going to be great. I think your suggestions there are great in terms of what can be done. I think sometimes if you do have, as I was saying, like a sound person, sometimes theatres have their own sound systems built in, and you don't even realise they literally have microphones round near the front of the stage that are being amplified. And if there's any system,
be able to get a feed off that, that's
absolutely.
A good point.
Trying to get a feed off of that could be good, and that can even go straight into the camera, or that can go into a separate recorder, like a Zoom sound recorder. But yeah, I think that just about covers it. Good luck.
Good luck. Good luck, Freya. Yeah. But it's a great idea to have that and to try and do it well and not just put a camera on.
100%. 100%.
I did when I was a kid.
I've done a few of those too.
That's been brilliant. I've loved talking about film theatre. Are they film and theatre? Have we answered the question? Are they cousins or brothers or sisters?
I don't know, but you know what's a good question, James? Maybe a question for another time. Is who is it more similar for? Is film and theatre the more similar experience for a director or for an actor? I think that's interesting, isn't it?
To discuss.
Anyway, thank you very much for joining us, guys. This has been wonderful as always. And do email us your questions where we can give you technical, the sound advice is in like sound advice, like it's good advice, not sound advice as in it's about sound. Unless your question is about sound, in which case we can give you sound advice. Email them to podcast@youngfilmacademy.co.uk and we will endeavour to answer you as interestingly, funnily and usefully as we possibly can. Take care.
See ya.